Okay. It's 3 o'clock. I want to call the Board of Directors hybrid workshop to order today, Thursday, January 16th, first workshop of the year or the last workshop of the last session. Rachel, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Daughtry.
I am present, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Frizzell.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Marine.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Mead. No, okay. Councilmember Merrill.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Nearing.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Labor Representative Norton.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterson. Mayor Roberts.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Councilmember Schweddy.
Present.
Thank you, Chair. We have a quorum of board members. For our board alternates, we have Councilmember Gallagher in attendance as well as Councilmember Fulcher online. And that concludes roll.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll now open for public comment. Each speaker has 3 minutes to provide comments. In room, I will call on you to speak at the podium. Remote calls will go to via Zoom. Do we have anyone who wishes to in room wishes to speak during public comment? Seeing none, we will go to online. Any remote speakers? Seeing none, we will move on to the Chief Executive Officer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report is that I have no report today, so we can get right to business.
Okay.
That was for Mayor Marine.
So then we will move on to our presentations, Zero Emissions Program update goes first.
Terrific. While the team's coming up, I'll preview this. I'm excited about today's discussion. We've got 2 important topics that we've been working on for the last couple of years, very steadily and behind the scenes. First up is going to be a report on where we are with our zero emission program. And then after that, we'll have a report on how we're thinking about moving forward with our innovative services program. So to start with the zero emission program, I want to just begin by saying it's been a journey over the last 3 years, and we have been pursuing this work on a truly agency-wide effort. It's an enterprise-wide program that affects every part of the agency, and so all of our departments are involved. The effort is led out of our IT group and capably project managed, as you know, by Jay Heim and a whole team of folks supporting him. Led at the executive level by Chaz Stearns, who's our Chief Information Officer, also in collaboration with Roland and Unju. And Melissa's got a big piece of this as well because of the facilities component. We're also joined today by one of our subject matter experts online, Peter Pizer, who is there online, and he's our lobbyist and representative to the federal government. Works very closely with our congressional delegation and has a long history of constructive and productive work with Federal Transit Administration. So he's got an eye on the transition and the changes that are taking place back in DC. So we'll get his perspective a little bit later on how things are shaping up and what we're watching. So just to recap where we are before I turn it over to the team, if we could advance the slides to the next. You'll recall that we have been actually working at this for about 3 years. Yeah, we'll just let Rachel do her jujitsu with the visuals there. So you'll recall we started with a feasibility study back in 2022 and a collaborative effort with the PUD to determine what we think would work for community transit and whether the utility was in a position to partner with us. And those findings came back affirmative. And so we moved forward with an initial beta test with a 60-foot articulated battery electric bus just to get our feet wet with the technology. Concluding that there were some promising opportunities, we moved forward into a fleet transition plan, which is a required step with FTA to qualify for federal funding. And in that fleet transition plan, we articulated how we would propose to go forward with the program. And the first step really was to look at a side-by-side test of battery electric and fuel cell technology, and also to begin planning fleet and facilities needs to do an initial deployment of vehicles in the next 5 to 6 years to test the technology and really prove the case. So we've been working on that bit by bit over the past year and a half. We've deployed the battery electric bus in revenue service. We've installed hydrogen fueling and charging facilities on site. We've begun grant applications at the state and federal levels to support the effort. And so we'll be hearing a little bit more about all of that today and what we've learned through that process. Here at the start of 2025, we're on the cusp of moving forward with an initial commitment to an increment of battery electric fleet, and the team will walk through that. We're also on the cusp of beginning to develop, plan, design, and implement the facilities at our operating bases to support that initial deployment and the training and workforce development component to go along with it. So that's the heart of what our conversation is today about moving to the next step. We'll also look over the horizon a little bit long term and give you our sense of how things are shaping up, what we're looking at, what we're watching, what variables could affect our ability to be successful longer term, and then open it up for questions at the end of the discussion. So next slide, just as a further reminder, and then I'll turn it over to the team. Thinking back to the last time we met in a workshop setting to talk about this topic, we built a program basically on a set of key pillars, and this reflects back the discussion that we staff had with you as the board at the time. First of all, our primary takeaway was that we were going to replace, to the extent we went into the ZE technology, we would replace our diesel buses as they reach the end of their useful life. We wouldn't be accelerating procurement ahead of what our service requirements dictate. Secondly, from an operational standpoint, we wouldn't go so far into this program as to put at risk our commitments to service. So either in terms of our ability to deliver service with the financial wherewithal, or from a service quality standpoint. We weren't going to go so far, so fast that we would compromise the quality and reliability of our service. And third, and perhaps most importantly, we were going to do this on a financially sustainable path. We weren't going to commit to capital expenditures or operating costs that we weren't confident we could cover long-term on a sustainable basis. So those have been sort of the three primary pillars that inform how we go forward. And then I guess I would note finally that as we went into the long-range planning effort, we set a goal of completing this transition, if possible, by 2044. And that date aligns with the Snohomish County Climate Action Plan and puts us in a good position to be able to do the kind of learning and experimentation that's necessary to manage our risks and be successful. So that's the framework that we're operating against. We've got some things we want to do as we go forward. I think we also told you at the time, or I did, that you would see this business come back to you in the form of annual budgets, procurement opportunities, transactions around facilities, investments. And so we're ready to spell out what some of those might look like today so that you can think about that. And really what we're interested in doing is checking back in with you, to share the information, share the learning, and check with you whether you're still comfortable with the path that we're on. So with that introduction, a long-winded one, I'll turn it over to Chaz and the team.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So next slide, please. So I have the next 3 slides, and essentially I'm going to go from high level down into a little bit of the detail of the processes we took, like what we did in 2024 to get to this point. The big bumper sticker here is that, the work of 2024 got us to 2 major outcomes. The first outcome was having the confidence to move forward with 40-foot battery electric buses on our local routes. And the second one is to identify the areas that we need to watch for the future. So one is like in the here and now that moves us forward. The second one is our future focused, kind of like, if you will, where we're going to be looking to understand how we will flex as conditions in the market change. Next slide. So these were our key areas of focus in 2024. First of all, the pillars, I'm glad Rick teed this up. The pillars are really important because they provide us our kind of North Star for the program as we go forward. And what we did as we went forward was we conducted some deliberate planning with the staff, and we looked at some different courses of action, looking at the technology and the organizational impact of change over time for those technologies from multiple different perspectives. Of course, we had the side-by-side pilot running as well. So if we're thinking about like operation, we're looking at like strategic and operational things through a staff process and analysis process, but we're also having like boots on the ground impact and looking at what it's like to really run a battery electric bus and a fuel cell electric bus, and also to get it up and running and what that level of effort really is. This whole time we as an organization are learning from each other through the staff process, but also learning through engagements with other transit agencies running BEB or a battery electric bus or a fuel cell electric bus. Also the transport agencies, the bus makers themselves, suppliers like Linde, who is our hydrogen supplier, and battery makers, all consultants, everyone that we could possibly learn from, and we're kind of piecing it together to understand what the current state is right now. And then in the end, this pays us forward because all those things that I just named are going to be areas that we will be watching over time, because we will need to know how technology is shaping our ability to deploy battery electric or perhaps fuel cell electric buses on our many different routes and at a level that does not compromise any of the pillars. So let me pause for a second right there.
Questions?
No, those of us that are hard of hearing are not hearing this really high pitch, but I can see that a lot of people in the crowd are.
Doesn't everyone have hearing?
Yeah, yeah, no. Well, I have tinnitus, so I mean, it is.
We good? Okay.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to call your attention to the graphic on the left side of the PowerPoint slide. And this is really an illustration of a principle. And the principle is that there's a here and now of what a 40-foot battery electric bus can service in terms of our routes. So that lower block is really, that's what can be the work that can be completed right now. It's about 35%. And then the rest of them are not strict. The second and third blocks are not strict forecasts. It's really illustrating a principle that over time, we expect technology to enable us to deploy more zero emissions buses to do the work. But right now, what gives us the confidence to move forward is that about a third of our routes can be serviced by battery electric buses. So that's where we're starting from here. And so the 40-foot BEB, as it says in the first bullet, is really about, that's where our transition strategy has been anchored. We worked with the Center for Transportation and the Environment, CTE, and the strategy and operational plan that was developed in collaboration really anchors us that we know that BEB is the backbone of our service plan. When you look at the BRTs, so the second bullet, when you look at BRTs and longer local routes, these are really much different from an operational perspective, right? They're longer service blocks. They're more frequent. And in our case, the BRTs have a signature experience, a little more like a train than a bus with different, form factors within the coaches. And so when you look at those kind of things, you understand, and we understand that in order to do that work with a 40-foot battery electric bus, it would be very difficult to do it without imperiling the pillars. For example, we'd need more. We'd need to have more service hours associated with that. We'd also need to have what's called opportunity charging or in-field charging, where at the termini, we have charging infrastructure to be able to prepare that bus to go out and complete that body of work. And so these were key things that we were understanding in it. As we stepped into the third bullet, which is really trying to understand the complexity and level of impact, from a whole of staff perspective, we were really oriented to the question, what would it take to be successful deploying a 60-foot fuel cell electric bus or a 60-foot battery electric bus on those BRT routes, with the anchor point being the 40-foot battery electric bus deployments. And so, when I say whole of staff, I mean, in my mind, I'm talking about like all the planning folks who are standing behind me or sitting actually behind me in the room. It includes capital projects, facilities, finance, maintenance, planning, safety, technology, and transportation, getting together and working through different ways to approach this, and really trying to understand what it takes to be successful and where there is an organizational impact of change. So we're seeing this then through a programmatic lens, and the programmatic lens is really, are we meeting the three pillars as described before? And we also wanted to look at this through the lens of an environmental component, which courses of action give us the best flexibility from an operational perspective, which are most financially sound or where the stress is financially, which are best supported by infrastructure and maintenance, which are best supported by operations and plans. And finally, how does risk play into it? Where are the risk areas? In addition to this, we looked at a deeper level at the environmental component. Really, it's a cutting edge analysis of the wells to wheels impacts of different technologies. And so we started with, regular diesel, and then what is the impact of R99 diesel, which we're currently running right now. And we understand that now that running R99 is actually a big step in the right direction from a carbon intensity or greenhouse gas intensity perspective. Is Mike Swalis smiling behind me?
Yeah.
Okay, called it. But it also revealed some aha moments for the staff. For example, we've talked a lot about zero emissions fleets, and we talk a lot about like hydrogen as being a powerful fuel for this. But if you generate hydrogen in a high carbon intensity fashion and deliver it through a high carbon intensity means like diesel deliveries, it really reduces the value of the environmental what you're doing for the environment. So it increases the environmental impact. And so that's another component to it that we weigh in our mind is like, what is the carbon intensity of the fuel, in this case, hydrogen, that we're considering? All of which leads us to back to where we started from, which is, we look at the two solutions here from the 40-foot BEB perspective, or really the BEB and the FCEB. The BEB, the organizational impact of change, is all around operations, and it's really around the getting it out and sustaining it in the field, as opposed to the fuel cell electric bus, which is really about the infrastructure and fueling. And so they represent different kinds of impacts. And if you try to run them together, well, that stresses our pillars significantly, which brings us back to, which again is our anchor point here, which is the 40-foot battery electric deployment. So as Rick alluded, the next steps for the program will be to identify that tranche of buses that we will need for local routes, bring them to the board along with the facilities master plan project, FMP7, which is building the infrastructure at Hardison campus to support the initial and future tranches of battery electric buses to run on local routes. So that kind of concludes my statements here to give you a framing. And Roland was going to go into the side-by-side pilot, but this might be a good point to pause and maybe take some questions for operationally and planning wise.
Talked about the. I was, it went away. You correctly talked about the use of fuel to get the hydrogen here, where we're, you know, more into the economic. What about all the stuff that we're now hearing about for even just getting a battery built? I mean, that's a lot of negative on the environment.
Yeah, so that I'm glad you called attention to that. So I guess the short answer is we know that the industry is looking at like what the potential is for recycling and for a secondary market. What I can't tell you is where it's going with that. So we know that that's going to have to be one of the places, like if you consider that, that'd be suppliers in the monitoring areas to understand where we can do the best thing from a financial and a sustainability perspective to select equipment basically that gives us our best opportunity of minimizing that. And I think that's like at the high level what we would try to do, but I think we're just too early in it from my perspective to see what the actual pathway is going to be. But you're absolutely right. That's not being widely addressed.
Any questions? Thank you.
Actually,
Oh, excuse me.
so in your point of, in this case, hydrogen, and if you're delivering it with a large diesel vehicle, right? And a lot of it's because we don't have the built infrastructure that we need for it to be competitive the way it probably should be. So taking that into consideration, almost somebody has to be one of the earlier adopters, I guess, on that, and hope we're not beta, right? Instead of VHS, but that would take some of that out of that. If we're not delivering it from California with a diesel truck, if we were having it delivered from, if it was within the county.
I feel like Rick probably would like to talk about this in our conversations with other transit agencies, but I'll just say that at the bumper sticker level, that you're absolutely right. If there's a market for hydrogen in the Pacific Northwest and low carbon intensity generation of hydrogen also in the Pacific Northwest, we stand a good chance to make that, you know, more usable for the transit and transportation industries.
That's right. And, you know, Roland is going to talk through some of what we're learning based on our early deployment of the side-by-side pilot. And it's pretty poignant. I mean, one of the obvious conditions that we're addressing right now is that there is no local supply of hydrogen. And so to acquire it reliably and sustainably for operational purposes requires us to truck it in from outside. That's not sustainable long-term. It's appropriate for the sort of R&D phase we're in right now, but it's not sustainable as an operating model. So part of the puzzle that we need to solve here is how to create that supply closer to home. And so we're engaging, organizing the transit industry in Washington State to work with the state government and the Hydrogen Hub to coordinate in that regard and see if we can get some alignment between what the Hydrogen Hub is investing in and what the needs of the transit industry are. But that's one of the main factors that Roland's going to flag that we need to watch going forward, because that's going to take some time. So.
And the second component of that would be the safety issue. I mean, just Google electric bus fires, and when they go fast. And in fact, literally probably within the last 4 or 5 months, I had a cousin who just a battery from one of their power tools, it burned his whole truck up it was in his driveway. And by the time, I mean, it literally is nothing but a shell. And that's just from one tiny little battery from a tool. And as you know, most of the roof is or the section of that is batteries. And so that's an interesting concern as well, safety wise.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly agree that through the staffing process, our delivery planning, our safety, security and sustainability, director, she brought a lot of like the safety concerns in. So it's something that has to be planned for. And it is, above and beyond what we're doing right now, just because of, things like the storage of materials and how that might impact neighbors, as an example. So, and at the battery and at the bus as well, that we're going to have procedures that cover both in field and, in our bases, how we handle emergency events like the one you mentioned.
Well, I think the one thing we've done very well and smartly is kind of going through, engaging it slowly and learning from others as they take it on. And I hopefully we're within a couple of years of some really good technology changes within batteries, and whether they're using silicone or other ways, not only in the aspect of safety, but in terms of the distance you're able to get in those batteries and the storage capacity and all of that. And just hopefully so we'd hate to get a whole fleet and then go, oh, the whole thing changed. We're stuck with old technology. So sometimes waiting and seeing is good.
Absolutely.
Okay. Am I on here? Very good. Okay, so I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the side-by-side pilot, and this is where this is where right now, I think everybody has seen the buses. Many of you have been on the buses and have gone out and been able to see and touch the fueling equipment as well. And this is where we're having the right now experience. And it's that normalizing just the presence of this new technology inside our operating environment. And that, really kind of goes back to why are we doing the side-by-side? We determined early in the program, and particularly in talking with some of our peers that are ahead of us in this conversion, they really emphasized, I remember a trip when we went to Link over in Wenatchee, the importance of just getting examples of this out there in the environment, start that learning. Back to that point that we discovered, very early in the program about you've seen one transit agency, the context is unique for every system. And so that was part of the goal here with acquiring 2 examples of these vehicles and then beginning to get that experience and just building that understanding. Get it early and let that help inform our decisions moving forward. So you authorized this back in 2023, and we acquired the vehicles late last year, or I should say late in 23, early in 24, and then have been working ever since to get them out in service and begin that learning process. On the battery electric side, I think you'll all recall back in October, we did get it out in revenue service for the first time, and we've been operating it ever since. We've got this new network that we have now inside Snohomish County. And we've always thought the 40-foot BEV platform is a really good fit, particularly for those local routes in South Snohomish County. And so beginning in October, it started operating on some of those shorter blocks. We were looking at routes like 103, 117, 112, the ones that are kind of those workhorses in that Linwood, Edmonds, Mukilteo area. And had some of the operators initially out of our STAR program, the operators that operate kind of the special services for us on special request, begin the early learning and then active in revenue service on a daily basis. Experience so far is it's operating around 130 miles a day. That's considerably less than its ultimate range capability, but it's we're being conservative in the early days, and we're starting to get that consistent track record of what's it like to maintain the state of charge on a vehicle like this. What's that driving experience? What's the charging experience back at base? What are those rhythms like? And also, what's it like to maintain this vehicle? And we've worked through a number of issues. The vehicle wasn't perfect when delivered, and that's to be expected on almost any bus we get. But it was also a reminder, even at the 3rd or 4th generation of BEVs that we're at right now, we are still, Mike's crew was still dealing with system integration issues between parts of the bus, and sometimes that would sideline the vehicle for a number of days or weeks while we were working through that process of getting it to the reliability it needed to be at to support public service. So that learning continues. Um, and it's just, it's the daily experience and just having that presence of this vehicle in the shop amongst our operators, starting to develop the standard operating procedures that will, continue to be refined and formalized over a number of years as we get this experience under our belt. And also then tethering back to the work that we did in our fleet transition planning, where we were using our industry estimates. What can these vehicles achieve? What do we think they're going to do in terms of matching with community transit service profile? This is where we're actually proving that concept. And so we're out there getting that experience. And as we start to stretch the envelope on its capabilities, we'll be able to really ground truth what we learned in the transition plan, or what we forecast in the transition plan. So that learning is a big part of this. Thinking about the fuel cell electric bus, so the one that's on the left side of the diagram here, we continue to really learn a lot in that space. And I would say we're in two different places. We're lagging behind some agencies on the BEV side. We've got, neighbors like Everett. They've got a fleet of 20 plus of these vehicles, and they're, have a number of years of operating experience. Metro and others obviously have been operating battery electric. Fuel cell, we had the first one in Puget Sound. We're one of only two in the state that are operating these. And what we're learning is we really are on the almost on the bleeding edge with this technology. And I think just a reminder, we've got ourselves and Lewis County Transit that are playing in this space right now. A number of agencies, 7 or 8 or so across the state, have indicated a level of interest and future plans, but nobody's really invested the dollars yet and actually acquired the hardware, both on the vehicle side and on the fueling side, with the exception of the two of us, ourselves and Lewis County. And they have a different fuel supplier than we do. And, we are in a collaborative relationship with our supplier, but we are learning with them every day. And I think just, clearly we're not in public service yet with the hydrogen bus. We're optimistic that we will be at a place where we're doing non-revenue testing later this month. I think the best answer we can give in terms of revenue service with customers on board sometime in Q1. And that's really the target to get this bus out there. Most of that is being driven by lack of reliability on the fueling infrastructure and the station itself. And just, the types of issues we're dealing with, it's just important to know. It's new for the vendor. It's new for us, putting all these different components together, and particularly putting them together in the Pacific Northwest. We don't have an extreme climate, but everybody's aware the last number of days we've had some fog, we've had some humidity, you get cold temperatures. We're dealing with things even like the fogging over or moisture present in some of the flame scanners, which are some of the safety equipment that goes along with this to make sure that the equipment is not leaking and that it's safe to use. They get triggered by things like a high humidity morning or some cold temps where there's some condensation overnight. And so we're getting that real world experience in terms of our maintenance and our facilities and our safety staff about what's it like to get that alarm at 1 a.m. and something's going on with the hydrogen fueling station and it needs to be shut down. And we've got to now troubleshoot a chain of equipment and understand where is the fault. And so far it's always been it's a faulty scanner who is, they think it's getting triggered, and it's turns out it's something like moisture or condensation. That's just, we know it's early days, and we knew when we went down this road that we would be learning a lot of lessons. And we're just finding that there are more lessons there to learn than we, had even thought at the beginning. And we're right there with our vendor there. I think we have a productive relationship with them, but working through these kinds of issues really takes time. And I would say, as we're contemplating the longer term questions that Chaz related in terms of what are the really big decisions we're going to make inside of this program, what are we going to do for BRT long term and those harder blocks of work where we need a technology like fuel cell, we're understanding a bit more about some of the complexities that we will likely be signing up for and some of the things we have to surmount in the design and implementation of that. So it's really bearing fruit right now from that perspective, as well as normalizing the presence of the technology in the workforce. The thing that I would end with in terms of in terms of what we're learning here, Chaz highlighted something about the the organizational intensity of change and where that lives. And it depends on, depending on the technology that we're looking at, it focuses in different areas of the organization. And so I really do want to reinforce for the battery electric, it's been a more simple process to set up the charging infrastructure to get the bus in service. Where that real learning is going to take place is on the operator side. It's a vehicle that has a different range. The service is organized rather than, having a full tank of gas that can go pretty much all day, and have the real constraint be the operator. In the current service, the constraint is we've got to give that operator a restroom break or, a time to get a snack or something, or just time to, focus on something besides the road. It's the human component that is the limiting factor on our diesel buses. In this case, the person can keep going, but the battery needs to be recharged. And so there's a different paradigm there. And there's an operational adjustment around that new tension in the system. On the fuel cell side, we've got the range that we need, and it's much closer to being comparable to the diesel. But there's all this learning that's going on in just getting the fuel pump to work and in a reliable way. And it will be new for Mike's maintenance crew as well. It's a different kind of vehicle. We have experience today with battery buses in terms of we've got hybrids that are essentially, it's a diesel generator on the back of the bus that powers electric motors. And we know how to maintain those. We know how to operate those. And it's kind of a known quantity in the shop. The fuel cells will be new, and we are learning there. So it's just a measure of, it tilts to different parts of the organization in terms of where is that organizational intensity of change, where do we need to really be focusing in terms of that workforce, preparing it for the future, developing the skills we need, so that we can deploy all of this at scale. So a lot of learning going on. That's kind of, I guess, the bottom line here. Let's go to the next slide. So at the top, Chaz identified these two major directions, or these two major conclusions we've come to. And the first was that we're confident, and I think along with the rest of the industry, confident in the maturity and the suitability of a 40-foot battery electric bus to perform a lot of the work that is in front of us. And then there's the harder stuff. It's the longer blocks, it's the bigger vehicles, it's the more challenging, the work that's going to be more challenging for a big battery electric bus platform. And so we're not ready yet to make final decisions on direction there. And so there's a lot that we're going to be monitoring over the next 6, 12, perhaps 18 months, a period of time where we try to cement our understanding and really discern a little more about what the market is doing. And also, as we'll talk about, what's going on at the federal level. So you can see on the slide here, we're paying a lot of attention to the transit industry, monitoring what our partners are doing, both in the immediate neighborhood, a lot of conversations with folks like King County Metro and their experience with battery electric, what's going on with things like pantograph charging on 60-foot BEVs, and also at the national level. And, we're observing things like within the California market, what was a very clear direction toward battery electric is now becoming more of a mixed, more diversified approach, where we're seeing some new emphasis on fuel cell. And I think a lot of agencies beginning to conclude what we have is that there's some work that's harder to do with battery that could be more suitable for that fuel cell platform, and where they have the appropriate power supply and availability of fuel to enable that, some move in that direction. So changes across the industry that we're monitoring carefully, and also more locally here in the neighborhood within Washington State. We're going to continue to collaborate closely with Melissa's team and be monitoring the Goldline development this year as we move toward baselining that project. And there are some key things inside the Goldline project that we really need to understand before we can also then refine our approach in terms of what's the right propulsion for that service. And so we're going to be, we need to understand what's the configuration of the vehicle itself. Are we doing in-lane running? Are we doing center lane running? And, what implications does it have for the design and form factor of the vehicle? What's the, what are the ultimate needs in terms of kind of room do we have at terminals to support? So, for example, opportunity charging at Smoky Point or Everett Station. And ultimately also, scope driving schedule. When is the line going to be delivered, and what does that imply in terms of when do we actually have to execute those orders on the buses and get them in the manufacturing queue? So more to come on that, but it's one of the things that really will influence decisions. A lot of paying attention to vehicle OEMs and development, particularly in the 60-foot battery electric space. One of the things that is constraining right now is we have one of the biggest manufacturers, New Flyer, in the 60-foot space that does not have is not currently equipping vehicles with the inductive charging. And we've had a lot of conversation about if we're going to do opportunity charging in the field, which is going to be required to do the harder part of the work if BEV is the platform, we are convinced that the inductive model where you have the charging plates in the ground, which you can see Link Wenanchi's solution there in the small picture on the right. It appears to be a simpler technology. It's more operationally forgiving and resilient, and also we believe superior from a maintenance perspective. It's not offered by every manufacturer, and there's also not a standard right now in the industry. There's at least two major competing technologies in that space, and it hasn't settled out yet. So again, that's a space that we're going to be watching closely, and we have other industry partners or transit agency partners that are very interested in that conversation too, and are going to be helping to lead some of the work to try to get resolution to those issues. Development of a local green, low carbon intensity hydrogen market. So, we just talked about this a few minutes ago. That is going to be really important. It's a shift in mindset in terms of securing a hydrogen fuel supply. It's not like when we're going out for bids for diesel and, we get a selection of respondents and that's the one that we're going to go with. This market doesn't exist. And we've identified that we're going to need, if we decide to pursue hydrogen, and we're going to be in that space for a number of years, we will need to actually staff intentionally, call it a hydrogen wrangler or somebody whose job it is to go out there and secure that in the market, and that being an ongoing process, that there will be a scarcity of hydrogen, there may be competition for that resource. And we're going to have to be very diligent about focusing on that and continuing to focus on that over a long extended period of time. So it's really a different space for us and a different orientation that we need to consider. And just kind of going back to one of the points made earlier, Mayor Marine, you were talking about the transport of it and then also the production of it. And one thing I just want to provide a little bit of kudos for the team maker. I don't think Allie's here today, but Allie Johnson on our team, on Jay's team, has really done some groundbreaking work for us with a tool called A-Fleet. And it's really that wells to wheels greenhouse gas analysis of fleet supply. And one thing that was insightful for me when I looked at the results of that was we look at the fuel we're trucking out of California right now, gaseous trailer, using diesel vehicles to get it up here. And the big thing about carbon intensity of hydrogen, it's really about the feedstocks and the production method of the fuel. Transport is a component of it, but when we look at that overall carbon intensity of the fuel, it was in the small single digits, 2, 3, 4% of that carbon intensity had to do with transport. Most of it is really about how is it produced, and it's that methane steam reformation, which is the primary method in the industry right now, that makes it a gray product, not a green product. And so it really is about, can we get it local in Washington State with clean power, and then can we secure that supply for ourselves in what will likely be a competitive market. So a lot of focus on that this year. Still very early. It's a very new field. There aren't a lot of players, and we're actively coordinating with folks like Chris Green at the Hydrogen Hub. We're looking at other potential industry partners where we might gain some confidence about the ability to consistently supply hydrogen to supply our needs. So. And then the final place that we're monitoring is clearly a lot of discerning right now on changes at both the federal and the state level. We all know there's, next week we start a new administration, and so there's going to be a lot of change in DC and a lot of interest in understanding what the new direction will be regarding support for these programs on the federal side. I won't talk about that because Peter's going to focus on that. But then also at the state level, and, you know, we've talked about clearly there's a budget deficit issue to solve in the state this year. And, we need to get clarity around ongoing support for these programs at that level too. So, really summarizes, there's a lot that we're paying attention to. And I think it's still going to be some time before we're at the level of, confidence that we need to be at to make the decisions on the bigger buses. And so we, at this point, focus on that 40-foot solution and continue to watch a lot of other areas. So with that, I mentioned Peter. I might pause, just, I shared a lot there side by side and what we're monitoring. Maybe I'll do just a very brief pause to see if there's any immediate questions before I hand it over to Peter.
Okay. I have one. Are we looking at solar panels to provide the electrical to our charging stations?
I think that's a safe assumption. I would say our design at this point is very conceptual. And I'm in a few minutes, Melissa will come up and give just a very brief description of next steps on the facility master plan front. But as we've looked at design, I think that's one of the assumptions we're making is if we put a cover over the over the Hardison campus bus yard that has a bunch of drop down chargers on it, we're anticipating there's opportunity to consider solar on top. I will say I think our understanding of that today is that that's not a viable way to power the entire enterprise, but it certainly would be a helpful supplement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Roland, we were down in Orange County and looked at their site down there. They had just made the decision, I believe, and they'd had battery electric buses for quite a while and hydrogen, that they were just going to go with hydrogen. Is that because they have a supplier there to readily get hydrogen where we don't? I mean, isn't a big part of this discussion is where do we get the product from when it comes to hydrogen?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think, my awareness of where agencies are making different decisions in terms of, having started in a direction toward battery electric and then making a decision to instead pursue hydrogen. I think it's likely the evolution of the hydrogen market and the availability of the fuel cell platform because those, that's still a very rapidly developing space. I also think it's this realization as some of that as that technology begins to mature and as it begins to become a more viable option, it's also the reality of how complex operations are with battery electric bus when you're pushing the envelope on range. And so that, we've concluded that from a planning and a modeling perspective, we don't have the real world experience yet. But I think that's some of the reality that's driving those decisions as you get deeper into it and you've converted a higher percentage of your fleet. Now you're left with the work that's much harder to it.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question and I'm not quite sure how to ask it, so it may take a couple of runs at it to get it right. But one of the things that is beginning to pop up more and more is climate resiliency. So as I look at what we're doing with our new transportation means, and we talk a lot about green and climate change prevention, as you're doing this testing or as you're talking to the other agencies, are we looking at what is going to be the most resilient fuel capability for our transportation? Right now, for instance, hydrogen looks pretty fragile.
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat the question I think I heard you ask about the consistency and reliability of that supply.
Mhm.
And therefore, I guess I as the operations guy who's responsible for putting service out every day, translate that into, can we still make service?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that is a huge part of what we're talking about. And I know that, Melissa's planning staff, I think that's been clearly expressed as one of the big concerns or one of the question marks around hydrogen is we've got our some of the service that is the most intensive in terms of BRT arriving every 10 minutes. It's a complex service to keep operating at that level. And you've got to be there and consistent and reliable to be able to deliver a bus reliably on those headways each and every time for the customer. And so I think that's a big part of our concern at this point, or a high priority in our research is understanding, can we do this reliably? And is it a sustainable source?
Well, I would guess as, as events unfold and the, weather gets worse and, less reliable, that we'll have lots of, places to talk to about what their experience has been with some of these, zero emission,
Yeah.
buses, so.
The other thing I would just add on that, on my response to that question, that's again where this is different than what we're used to. We have a diesel contract. We have one diesel contract. They're the supplier. They're going to be reliable in providing that fuel. What we're absolutely talking about, if hydrogen ends up being the answer, is a diversity of suppliers. And that, could be, we're considering is on-site production one of the strategies there. Absolutely delivery, but probably delivery from a number of suppliers as well. So that if somebody's out of commission this week, we've got someone else to pivot to make sure that we've got that supply. So that's different. We're not accustomed to having to rely on multiple suppliers for a single commodity like that.
Thank you.
If I could build on that, I just want to bring it back to the kind of the core conclusion here that Chad's led with, because your question is just relevant to that conclusion. What we're saying, based on what we know today, looking at the pillars, committing to service quality and reliability, financial sustainability, organizational capacity to change and sustain the operation, we're pretty confident we can cover about a third of our service with the battery electric technology that exists today. And we're confident that we can pay for that and implement that and deliver that. We're saying at the same time, the other 2/3 of our service, we're confident today that we need to continue to operate a diesel fleet using R99 until we know more. And we're going to continue to do a ton of learning in that space, and that picture may change. And that's that middle block that Chaz was pointing at. The amount of learning we're going to do in the next 5 to 6 years based on the rate of change in this space is going to be substantial. So that number could come up from 35% to something higher. But based on what we know today, we think a pretty conservative approach is in order. So.
Yes.
I just wanted to agree with what Rick has talked about. It's going to be an interesting 5 or 6 or 20 years as we go along and we find out what the supply chain is, find out what other municipalities, what other cities, whatever the other states are doing in this technology. I'm glad we're out there. I'm a little nervous that we're out there, especially with the hydrogen. But I think it is the next responsible thing that we can do for our climate. And so keep doing the good work. There's a lot of things. I wrote lots of notes and I thought, but I don't have a question because I don't know enough to have the right questions. So we're going to be relying on this group of professionals and experts and subject matter experts to be finding the right questions that we need, not just for this organization, not just financially, but for our community that relies on us. So thank you for the presentation. It's been very illuminating.
And there's a bit more to come.
Yes.
Let's see.
Yeah, I wish it was a question. And Mayor Roberts, thank you. I learned quite a bit at the Orange County as well, and we took that tour there, and I kind of went into this. I've been leaning towards hydrogen as being, especially because you can get more distance on it and really being the answer. And I was sort of disappointed, kind of the takeaways from that. One, which was, I mean, are you serious? You're having somebody in a diesel truck deliver that hydrogen? I mean, hundreds of miles. Like, first of all, isn't the person delivering hydrogen investing in a hydrogen truck? I mean, right here, you use it, but I'm not going to. That struck me as odd that somebody would be delivering hydrogen in something other than a hydrogen vehicle. And then the other was the fact of how much every time you transfer that hydrogen, how much it loses because you have to vent it. And it was like 25%. So imagine if we had a tank of diesel and every time we took our buses and filled them, we lose 25% of our product. that was just crazy to me. So it was almost at a point of saying, this is great and applaud what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, we're trying to move people, right? From where they're at to where they want to be. Or are we trying to save the world? And at what cost are we willing to spend? How much per mile, cost per mile, and taking that into consideration? And maybe it's too soon and maybe the technology has to get there or the infrastructure. But we always, I think in this, keeping an eye on how much more are we willing to spend, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Lance has-
Oh, Lance.
I don't have a question either, but I do have. But I do have a statement, and what I was thinking about, listening to the experts and whatnot. And it's the following. I think now I can understand how the horses felt when they were told, we don't need you anymore. We're hooking up our stagecoaches up to overhaul overhead electric wires. And they'll no longer be called stagecoaches. They are now electric trolleys. I mean, I'm just going back to my youth, when I was wondering what they're gonna do in that case. And in this situation, I think that's quite obvious. They told them. That's it. You'll miss me.
Other questions?
So I think we were gonna move forward now to hear a report from Peter. I think to introduce him, I mentioned his background and the role he has with us earlier. I talked about our confidence in being able to deploy battery electric subfleet to handle about a third of the work and the facilities to go along with that, and that we're confident we have a financial handle on that is sustainable. There is no there with this program without our funding partners at the state and federal level. And we've been super successful over the last couple of years in putting together a financial package to support this work. And so the near term, we're pretty bullish. The longer term, less so. This transition, if we extrapolate out over the next 20 years to 2044, we think we can get there because we're pretty confident the technology is going to respond to the market. But we can't get there without the sustained engagement and participation of our federal funding partner in particular and the state as well. So there's change afoot in the world. We've got a new leadership in Olympia. We've got new leadership coming in back in DC. We had some big ambitious programs enacted the last few years that are providing the resources to do this work. And so, everybody sitting in my chair around the country is wondering, whether the priorities at the federal level are going to shift around at all. And so to give us a little bit of perspective on that, some crystal ball gazing, Peter Pizer coming in from Washington, D.C. is going to give us his thoughts. Peter.
Thank you, Rick. And it's good to be with you all. Wish I could be there in person. But as Rick said, there's a lot going on here right now, a lot of changes coming. And I'm going to talk about how that might impact funding for this program. So if we could go to the next slide. So as Rick said, in recent years, there have been very significant infrastructure programs enacted in Washington, and I'm sure you're familiar with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was enacted with President Biden's strong support and bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. One of the largest percentage increases across all of the programs in that bill was for low and no emission buses and bus facilities. Under that program that was enacted in 2021, there are two programs that can fund the transition that we're talking about here. One is what's called low no emission grants. That program, prior to the enactment of this bill, was about $125 million a year. Once this program, the bill was enacted in 2021, it jumped to 1.1 billion per year, and became a very substantial driver of battery electric and also hydrogen adoption around the country. And then the other program is a more long-term program. It's been around for about 40 years, which is the Bus and Bus Facilities Program, which is not specifically focused on no emission vehicles, but does provide almost another $400 million per year that can go in that direction. These programs right now are in force through federal fiscal year 26. After that, Congress and the administration would have to agree to extend them along with all of the other transportation programs that are under the infrastructure law. Given the changes in Washington with the new administration and new leadership on Capitol Hill, it certainly is an open question whether a program like no emission vehicles would get the same kind of support when these programs have to be reauthorized 2 years from now as they did in 2021. So that's an area we're looking at. It's certainly heightened risk around the funding for these programs going forward after fiscal year 26. We do have some history, though, to look at. Rick said, looking ahead, looking in the crystal ball, and that is part of my job, but we can learn a lot by looking back to give us an idea of how this might go. So in the first Trump administration, there was, both of these programs were there. The no emissions program was much smaller, as I said. But the Trump administration did implement that program according to the way it was written. They did allocate funding across the nation in a way that is not political. You see red and blue states getting money from them during their time in office. So they were faithfully executing it. On the Bus and Bus Facilities Program, where there's a lot of flexibility, the Trump administration allocated about 9% of that to battery electric vehicles and battery electric facilities during their time in office. That's a major difference from what we've seen from the Trump administration or from the Biden administration with this much larger program. Obviously, the no program now at 1.1 billion, it does have a provision that was not there in the past when this was a smaller program, that 25% of it must go for low emission vehicles. That could be CNG or hybrid buses. 75% of it goes for no emission vehicles and facilities. And that's how the Biden administration administered it. On the Bus and Bus Facilities Program, where the Trump administration allocated 9% to zero emission vehicles, the Biden administration has been allocating between 40 and 45%. So that's a very significant difference. And I think we can expect with a Trump administration that the amount of money from that program that they will put to zero emission vehicles is going to be significantly less. So for that reason, going forward, we can anticipate, a reduction over the next couple of years in the amount of money that is allocated for zero emission buses and bus facilities. And then, as I said, after the next 2 years, then we have even greater uncertainty about whether these investment levels will continue. So all of that leads to an appropriate note of caution around ongoing federal support over the next 5-year period, certainly. It is important to emphasize we do have 2 more cycles of grants to be awarded under this current program at these current funding levels, which certainly provides us with a very good target over the next 2 years to try to roll up some federal support. I will say, and I'm sure the board is aware of this, that when Community Transit submitted a low-no application last year, it was very highly rated by Federal Transit Administration. But the demand was so great around the country that it was not successful. So we are certainly feeling good about the quality of an application coming forward from Community Transit in terms of meeting program goals. The key to success over these next 2 years is going to be continuing to produce a quality application, which Community Transit's team is very capable of doing. And second, having strong support from our congressional delegation. As much as we might look at the Trump administration and say, well, Washington State's delegation is heavily Democratic, particularly in the Puget Sound region. Why would we expect the Trump administration to give us money? I would say to that there is a fair amount of bipartisan support for transit around Capitol Hill. Rick Larsen is still the top-ranking Democrat on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in Congress. Senator Murray, of course, still the ranking Democrat at the Appropriations Committee. Senator Cantwell continues to be the top Democrat on the Commerce Committee, all of which have strong nexus to the Transportation Department and good relationships with their Republican colleagues in their committees. So it still may not set up quite as well as we thought the Biden administration did for us, but we still have some great assets, and the support from the congressional delegation, has been demonstrated for this transition plan by congressional earmarks that we've received in the last couple of years from members of the delegation. The earmarks are relatively small, $2.5–5 million, but they do represent a level of support when a senator and a member of Congress are allocating funds where they have a lot of demand specifically to community transit. So we feel like we've got some assets there. But the bottom line is all of this sort of rolls up into, as I said, a note of caution around funding assumptions. We worked together with the finance team at Community Transit. Anju led the team through a financial plan last year that made some assumptions about federal funding based on the environment at that time. And it certainly is reasonable at this juncture to take a hard look at that and be more conservative about assumptions going forward based on this environment we have that adds more uncertainty to that funding, that flow of funds. So with that, I'll turn it back over. Thanks, everybody.
And I think maybe this is the time we can talk about at what cost we can do these programs. So next slide, please. So bear in mind, this is a 20-year projection of cost. When you're always projecting things out, the further out gets a little bit shakier. So just so that this is a painting picture of directionally correct numbers, a lot of economic variables and everything can affect these numbers as well. So total cost we're looking at between 25 through 44 is around $856 million. Way back when Jay was here, I think last year talking about this program, we were joking a lot about $1 billion man, and turns out to be pretty much on the mark. So I just wanted to run through the costs a little bit. So large chunk, the one in yellow here, is the bus purchase cost. That's a delta from the diesel bus prices. So which is the largest chunk of the cost. These bus vehicles are more expensive and less OEMs are available, so less competition. And we don't know what the price will do over time. Green block is capital costs, other capital costs, which is like facility upgrades and infrastructure investments for the charging infrastructure. And we are, I think, assuming in this case, both bases will be upgraded, so they will have a charging facility available. And the brown color one is additional operating costs. So a lot of these battery electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles tend to have midlife change of battery, and those are expensive. And the more vehicles we have in fleet in the out years, it gets more and more expensive. I wanted to show next the same slice of the cost, but it's over the year. So you can kind of see in the beginning of the year, there's some capital investment costs related to infrastructure, a lot of greens. And we're not purchasing a lot of buses until 2028. And you start to see the bus purchase costs go up and down. It has a peaks and valleys, mainly driven by our fleet schedule, retirement dates, and when we have to do bulk purchases. I think earlier Chaz and Roland talked about BRT is complicated. And PRT is where I think we see the most cost bulk increases show up, because they tend to be larger buses and more expensive and big volumes that we have to replace all at the same time. And as I mentioned earlier, the additional operating costs tend to grow over time. And if you go further out to closer to 2044, it gets much larger, because by then we have more sizable fleet that needs to have a battery replaced. So next, I want to talk about how can we pay for all this. So I wanted to echo Peter's comment about cautionary and being conservative. And this is fairly conservative pictures. And as any financial forecast, it is all based on what we know today, the price of bus cost and all the facility investment costs that we're estimating, as well as other operating costs and battery costs and all of those. And economics can always change. So we don't know what the future looks like for 20 years about grant funding, but we can make some safe assumptions around what we'll be able to accomplish in the past history. So our past is our teaching moment for here to be able to project out. So we did some really conservative estimates around state grants and federal grant funding, knowing the current administration changes and uncertainties around environment. And we still have quite a bit of cash reserve that we can put towards these programs, which is yellow here. So about 60% of the total cost we do think we can fund with no problem. And a lot of those funding, that's as Rick mentioned earlier, in earlier years, for next 10 years, 10, 15 years, we do not have much problems in funding. All the funding gaps that's starting to show up, the 351 million on the top, that's the funding we need to seek. So this estimate does not really assume that we're going to win loaner grants or bus and bus facility grants anytime soon what we need to do from now and next 10 years is to try to close that funding gap as much as possible. The only good news is that we have time on our side. We can test the ground and see how much we're capable of collecting more funding. And earlier years, we get more funding, it will allow us to accumulate investment and build our fund reserve, and it will help us in the long term. Any questions on financials?
All right. Well,
Mayor Frisell?
What brand of crystal ball are you using? I know that it's got to be so difficult.
It is, so it's boiled down to very simple bar chart. I have to say, finance team, especially budget team, worked month and month to get to this boiled down chart. We are fortunate, last year we've been working on long range financial plan. So we basically built a giant calculator that we can feed many, many different variables.
Yeah.
And then we can do scenario planning and trying to see what the results are. So I think that work was super helpful to get to this space.
it'll be interesting how it pans out and how so many variables will change. So,
Yes, for sure. So, I mean, I'm echoing what Peter said. We need to be cautious and monitor our environment, and then we can always pivot and change our plans.
yes, we can.
Yeah, I saw it's about 17.5 million short per year, roughly. Everything being equal.
Correct.
Is this based on primarily BEB? Just,
No, actually, so one thing I didn't mention, this is worst case scenario financially that we are thinking. It's trying to meet 2044 target, combining BEB as well as fuel cell electric buses.
all right, perfect, thank you.
And with the production and storage, all of those that goes along with the hydrogen.
Well, as a technology, they're gonna get cheaper, right?
I hope so.
We hope.
So Mayor Frizell wanted to know what crystal ball you have. How often do you change the batteries in that? Oh, it's hydrogen, okay.
Are
Other
you
questions?
asking about the fleet? No, okay.
So maybe this is a good time to summarize, because we do have another topic. And so Roland.
Yeah, last slide there, Rachel. So this just briefly, kind of summarizing where we've been in the conversation today. We're going to continue to focus in the near term on the side-by-side, getting our fuel cell electric bus in service, and then, really looking, as I said, to normalize that operation and squeeze all the learning out of it that we can. We have a round of low-no grant applications coming up in the spring, and the team is already really focused on updating things like our transition plan and really getting ready for that process, which is going to be a big one. A lot of monitoring that I went through that we're going to really continue to focus on, the federal environment being a big piece of that, but also, as I said, looking to understand, shape, and influence the hydrogen market in Washington State as well, and help that inform our decision on that. And then there's a lot to move in terms of preparing for this 40-foot battery electric fleet procurement. So we're asking Melissa, will be in the next presentation too, but Melissa owns the capital side of this. And so I've asked her just to talk a little bit about what to expect in terms of the facility master plan side.
Yeah, so the board is really familiar with our facilities master plan. We just completed phase 6, which was the ride store project. Still have a couple more phases in that 1 to 6 phase, but we are now adding in phase 7, which is the battery electric conversion over at the Hardison campus. So last year, the capital team kicked off a conceptual design study, just like, okay, we got to put this here, we got to put that there. What would that look like? And that gave us some good information to start working on a scope of work. So the board will see in the April SACDC and then the May board meeting a request to begin that design and engineering work over at Hardison campus. It's a 2-phased approach, the facilities master plan 7. So looking at that first group of battery electric buses and what we need with the associated infrastructure there. And then the second phase will be as we bring in more electric buses. Right now, we're holding on facilities master plan 8, which is Cash Park, pointing in the right direction. Yeah, that way. And so that will be TBD, right? So will that be a hydrogen facility, or will that be a continuation of the battery electric? So to be determined in the future.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I think that concludes it from the staff. I think I'm going to go back to where we started. But first of all, I want to thank the board for all the questions and comments, and this took a little longer, but it was a lot of information and we wanted to get it on the table so you could be pondering it. Unju showed that chart of the cash flows over 20 years, and I want to bring it back to the first 5. That's the period of this program about which we have the most confidence, and that's the one we want to move into. So that would be, the first tranche of battery electric 40-foot buses and the associated facilities coming back in the form of procurement proposals and decisions to the board. And then, as the graph shows and as the bar chart showed, there's a big gut check for the agency, about 5 to 6 years out, where we need to come back again with our aggregate learning and talk again about whether we want to fully commit to go the rest of the way. And so fortunately, we don't have to make that decision for a while. We can continue to learn and approach this incrementally. So that's what our proposal is. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the microtransit program where I assume you're going to show us how to get $17.5 million of additional revenue every year.
So switching gears, I'll introduce this one as well. Matthew, Molly, and Jen joining Melissa at the table. So I just a couple of brief comments. So you're all familiar with the pilot phase that we've been in, and I want to sort of reemphasize that we've been in an experimental phase and will continue to be in an experimental phase as we deploy in Lake Stevens, Arlington, and Darrington, and as we continue in Alderwood. This program of piloting this service is designed kind of like the zero emission program to inform how we commit and grow this service and sustain it long term. So you're going to hear from our innovative services team today that pioneered this work and got it out there on the road with the support of the rest of the agency and also the planning team. Because as we move from the pilot phase to the permanent phase, ZIP and innovative services like ZIP will become part of our regular service planning regimen. And so we want to today talk about how that transition will occur and how you'll start to see the work flow further down the road. We're excited about this. It's been a great service. It's been really well received by the public. And we know there's a lot of excitement about seeing it elsewhere in the county. And so this is our roadmap for starting that work.
Hello?
That's on.
It is?
Just get it closer.
All righty. Does anyone want to go to the next slide already? Not that way. All right, I wanted to express, like, it's kind of crazy to be here today, sitting here, because when this all started, I remember, you know, a couple of us being out there as Alderwood was opening on October 20th, 22 or something, and being like, is anyone going to take this? Right, sitting next to the car, seeing if it would leave its little parking spot. And, you know, what a difference we are as we sit here today. Now we have 4 zones up and going. And so let's talk about it just at a very high level and look at it and remind ourselves what we're doing and why, and some things we're learning and some things we still need to know. So if we think about where our zones are in very distinctly different locations, really honestly on purpose. Right? I'm not going to go into why we picked all of them and how we got there. Most of you have been through that. We can take you on that history journey later if you need to. But if you look at it, they're all very different. And the purpose is to learn. And that's the point of the innovation team and the piloting, is to try and learn and see what's working. How does it resonate? And also to say, where else in our Snohomish do we have areas that could look like this? So as we're learning, where else can these learnings apply to? And so high level, what have we learned in Alderwood? This and much more, and we will continue to learn much more. We have a hugely diverse customer base. 52% are low income. 25% are seniors, and 27% are customers that have disabilities. That actually exceeds kind of the population that's in Alderwood right now in some of the cases, especially with seniors. We know that they are now taking it mostly for errands and connecting to transit. We didn't know if that would happen. We hoped it would happen, and it is happening. They can book rides over the phone, but the app is just as important. And in fact, when we first started, it was kind of almost a 50-50 split, and now 70% are using the app now, but still really important to have both of those modes. And we really need a good technology that can help maximize routing and shared trips, so that we can get the most efficiency out of the service that we're providing. That will help reduce costs, and give customers shorter waits, better trips, all of those things. And right in Alderwood, biggest request we have, of course, is expand. Can you please bring it here? Can you please bring it here? Can you just move it a little bit so I can go get to my house, etc.? What does that mean? What does that mean for our Snohomish? Those are things we need to learn. The other thing not on here, but the more service we put into Alderwood, the more they use it. Right? Which is really great and also an interesting challenge that we haven't had before. We'll learn and talk about that. Metrics, high level. It brings in a variety of unique customers. It's customers use it infrequently, or we have a base that's also using it regularly. But it is bringing in new customers into transit that haven't used it before, which is really great, and introducing them into other types of transit that we have, like the bus and Swift and all those great things happening in Alderwood. You can see our annual boardings, and a really cool thing that we're also seeing is how many people are taking advantage of the fact that they can use it if they have a wheelchair, and are getting a lot of good experience and satisfaction out of what this service brings, able to book it right there and pick up and go. Our net promoter score or customer satisfaction type of a score is really high and crazy high for people over 65. Maybe expected, maybe unexpected. I didn't really know. How would people over 65 feel about it? But we're starting to see they really love it. Our cost per boarding around 37, and at an average boardings per hour, 2.5. We'll look at these metrics a little bit later in Melissa's presentation, but just so you can see where it is ish in Alderwood right now. So that brings us to our next 3 areas. What do we know? It's been operational for 4 weeks, going on 5, I think. So as you could tell, what we know is a lot less, but we do know people love it. They are using it. We are starting to see some continued habits of people booking for regular bookings and still getting, obviously, a lot of new customers in. Last week was our first full, I think Rick touched on this somewhere, first full week of service after the holidays. We saw a significant increase already in boardings just after that first full week after the New Year's and holidays. I think it was around 40% increase. So like I said, we still have a whole bunch more to learn in these areas so that we can apply them later into how does this work into our larger service plan, which will bring us to Melissa. But I might pause, take some clues from these guys to see if we have questions on this part. Yes. Christine?
So where are we with the DART program in the Alderwood area? Is that still running at full bore, or is the ZIP program picking up the slack? Do you know where
We
that
have
is?
seen people use ZIP instead of DART, but yes, DART is still running completely as it needs to. We have regulations. It has to do what it
Okay.
needs to do. So that is happening. We are doing some reach out though, and trying to make sure that this service is available for them as well. It
Okay.
starts to provide us information for our learnings as we see what can we do to improve DART service overall, or innovate around improvements for that customer.
Okay, because I thought that their customer base was heavily on elderly people and people in wheelchairs, so I'm glad to hear that they're both still there and that
Yep.
both entities are doing strong ridership.
Yep.
Thank you.
Do we have any breakout yet with regard to how many rides are for free?
Or for what?
The youth?
Oh,
Because that also goes into your cost per ride and, you know, the breakdown there. So there must be, you must be keeping track somehow.
Data that shows ridership, I think 18 and under, right? Or an age bracket when they book in Alderwood. Right.
Yeah, because remember, we were rolling this out, it was about the same time that we were,
Yeah.
everybody under 18 rides for free. And so I thought, how would that impact the,
Yeah.
the ridership?
Yeah, we can get more specifics for you, but
We're curious to learn in the 3 new zones because 2 of them have multiple high schools in them. Alderwood does not have a high school in it, so we anticipate and are already starting to see now that kids are back in school. We've heard from some of our drivers out in those zones that kids are starting to find the service. So we'll be curious to see what that percentage of customer base is and how that just affects overall operations.
I just because Alderwood has a mall. I don't know if you've heard, but a lot of kids may want to go back and forth from their house to the
We
mall.
definitely have
Which is,
rental by
the mayor loves, right? Sending people to the mall is good.
We'll dig through the data and get back to you with a specific answer.
Kevin's here. Kevin probably has it off the top of his head as well.
Do you have any sense of how many of these rides get shared?
We do for Alderwood, we average anywhere from probably 15 to 20% a day are shared. We are, I think, as many of you may remember when I was here talking about why we were awarding the contract to VIA versus MedStar, that was one of the concerns we had was we didn't feel their app had the right kind of algorithms to efficiently do shared trips, and we're very excited to bring VIA on with their technology. We already are seeing, even in the early weeks, a good amount of build towards shared trips. As we increase the volume in service in that capacity, we will, I'm sure, see much higher. We know our partners who have similar zones to ours, like say in Alderwood, see 50 to 60% of the trips being shared. So we definitely plan to see an increase there and are excited to see in the new pilot areas what that shared trip percentage will be, because ultimately we want to create the most efficiency we can.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You can ask more. Let's pass to Melissa and team so they can give you some more information, and then together we'll probably have some fun after.
Yeah, so Molly just shared the current state of what we're doing with our Zip service. And I wanted to share some of the work that our teams have been doing together. So Jennifer and Kevin and Meg in Innovative Services, Matt Muller and his team, who is working on system planning, and then Noah Tunicwood here today with planning and integration. So we started this work together. It's been really interesting and fun. Jennifer and her team have been doing a lot of research and development way back to the beginning of all the Zip Zone and leading into the 3 pilot areas. But what we do know is, although microtransit isn't a new mobility option, it is an ever-changing environment. And so as it matures, we've been wanting to continue to sort of stay on the edge of the research and development. We're working on doing a service portfolio that now has microtransit in it. So I'm going to share some industry learnings. Some of this may be new, some of it may not be. So there are different types of microtransit service that we've been researching across North America. There's testing in new markets where there is no transit service. There's also the opportunity to extend into areas that are difficult or really hard to serve, because we know that fixed route bus can't go everywhere, and there's the infrastructure issue. There is commingling of microtransit and paratransit. This is something we're very interested in as we think about our paratransit service. So vehicles that serve 2 purposes, but they're dispatched from a central area. So a customer will call in, request a ride, and then we determine whether that would be a typical microtransit trip or if it would be a dark paratransit trip. One of the things we're learning is there's some significant cost savings around this commingling of microtransit and paratransit. And it also does provide a really true on-demand service for our ADA customers. Fixed route alternatives. So fixed route is where you put in place a fixed route, a microtransit service. And this can be used in areas where it's, again, difficult from an infrastructure standpoint. The roadway network won't support that. It's suitable sometimes in areas where there's a high transit need, but low demand and less density and walkability. So we can bridge that gap in those areas. I think the board's really used to first, last mile. We've talked about it a lot. So that's the opportunity to connect folks to high frequency routes, to transit hubs, those sort of things. It also can reduce the barrier of accessing larger public transportation networks. Someone really wants to get to the Link Light Rail Station, but they don't know how to get there. They don't have an ability to get there. This provides that first last mile. And then lastly, specialized service. So this would be something like OWL service, which is late night and early evening, early morning and late night service. So for heavy rail and light rail systems across the United States that operate 24 hours, there's there's an issue where fixed route isn't there to serve them. People are getting off that fixed route, that bus, off that light rail service or that fixed route, and they don't have anywhere to go. So that's an option. You could use microtransit. We've also shared with you how we've been working on bus bridging. So Rick talked about our successful bus bridge that we did a couple months ago. There are agencies across the nation that are using microtransit to use some sort of bus bridge. So if there's a breakdown in the larger system, they can use microtransit. There's different ways that it's being deployed. There's also, as with everything, strengths and challenges. So, one of the strengths that we see is it fills transportation gaps. And again, it goes back to that roadway network and the infrastructure constraints of where a fixed route bus can go. Obviously, there's increased convenience and reduced wait times. You can have an app, you can plan your schedule, and the microtransit comes and picks you up, and you know how long it's going to take to get that ride. It provides an alternative for transportation options. So one of the things that Molly and Jennifer have been sharing is we have people who've never used public transit before, and they're getting that foray into the public transit system by feeling more comfortable using a microtransit service. And then that first and last mile solution. There are also some challenges that we've been learning about. We've been talking with other agencies. So one of the tenets of public transit is you put a lot of people in one bus and you take it somewhere. Microtransit is different. There's a lower average occupancy. Molly talked about ride sharing and having more than one person in the ride, but that comes with some challenges. So pairing rides together, how long does it take for someone to get to their destination if someone else is in there? So agencies are looking at, what is a reasonable time to do that? And what are the technology solutions? Am I not on? Oh, he's got a loud voice. All right. Thanks, Jordan. So that is one of the things that has been a challenge for some agencies. How do they manage that ride share? There's also limited scalability. So it's been interesting to learn about that. Unlike fixed route costs for microtransit, as ridership increases, there's a ceiling where it becomes too expensive and it fills up that zone and you got a lot of cars with congestion. And so we've seen agencies do things like limit the number of rides per customer, which doesn't feel like a great customer experience. And in some cases, agencies have been a victim of their own success where it's become so popular that they've actually had to discontinue the service because the cost became unsustainable. So that was something really interesting to learn. It needs to be planned with fixed route, and that's what our teams are doing together. And so you cannot do it in a vacuum. You want to be looking at a system as a whole, an area as a whole, and how do you serve that optimally with different products. There's some distinct issues around banking, privacy, and technology because we use a different way of paying. So wanting to make sure that there aren't barriers for customers who only use cash. For folks who don't have smartphones. And because many private contractors such as VIA are gathering a lot of data about our customers, there's privacy concerns. That is not unique to this. We all have them across the different platforms that we use, but that was something that came up as we were doing our learnings. We also have been digging into the cost analysis. This is your favorite question. How much does it cost? So looking at things from a system level. So if you think about Swift and the 3 lines that we have and you add blue, green and orange together, the average cost for boarding on the aggregate is $13. For regular bus, it's 26, and for Zip Alderwood, it's 37. So when you look at it from that vantage point, it indicates that obviously Zip has a higher cost per boarding. The next slide I'm going to show you, however, is going to show where there's parity between that $37 Zip Alderwood cost per boarding and our regular bus service. We played around with a way to make this a little better. So I'm going to try and orient you on the right-hand side, which is off the chart. Swift Blue, which is we know our highest ridership, also has the lowest cost per boarding. So it's about $8.99 per rider. But where I really want you to orient is looking in that left corner where we have the green circle, find the red dot, and that is Zip. And you can see where there's a lot of parity in that circle with local service, fixed route service that we've been operating. And the thing that tells us is that we have made a value decision as an agency. We serve a PTBA, and we know that it's important for us to have coverage, right? And so we know there are areas in our coverage, in our system that we've committed to serving, but they are not very well utilized. They have a lower productivity, and so therefore they have a higher cost per boarding. What's exciting about seeing where Zip sort of lives in that world is that yes, there's going to be a higher cost per boarding, but there's going to be a better customer experience associated with that. And that really helps us make decisions about how we're serving different areas in our PTBA. I'm going to stop there just to see, like, I know it's a lot and it's hard to see on the chart, but hopefully I drove that point home.
And just to be clear, every blue dot is a bus route.
Every blue dot is a bus route. Yeah. So for example, if you look at, like the Route 280, which is goes from Granite Falls to Lake Stevens to Everett, it lives in that sort of same sort of parity of cost per boarding as our Zip Alderwood does. Yes.
So when I first saw Darrington, it's probably like, oh, that's great. And then I'm like, well, that makes all kinds of sense, right? Because is that the one that's the 111 all the way at the top? I understand that way. Oh, of course. Yeah, that way to go in Briar. No, but just because it doesn't make sense to run a bus all the way to Darrington, have it run around Darrington, but it does make sense, right, to move the few people around with a car. So that makes all kinds of sense. My concern, I guess, as we go is for the people who take the Swift, they just want to run down 99 or down a 132nd and they may, hey, wait a minute, I can just take Zip and do that, and I don't have to get on the, and so the one that is the most efficient, are we robbing that system? It, I guess, would be because of the convenience factor, and hey, I can ride by myself, I don't have to ride with anybody else on the bus, and I don't have to stand out in the rain and wait for it, and it'll come to my house. So I mean, there are lots of reasons I can see that somebody would want to do Zip, but I just don't want it to take away from things like Swift that,
Which really speaks to the balance of our service portfolio and where do we put things in certain areas so they optimize. Did you want to add? Oh, I thought you were leaning in. You're just getting a grape. Okay. All right. Great.
Busted.
Right. Let's see why. There we go. So the other thing that we've been working on is.
Hold on, Melissa, just for a second. So to your comment, Zip is only in a specific area of Alderwood. You're not running down 132nd Street.
yeah, it is now. Currently.
Well, it's never gonna go to Mukilteo, so forget it.
Hey, that'd be actually the perfect spot because I don't have a Swift line or a park and ride lot. But anyway,
Yeah, but you need a parking ride lot for a Zip now. So I think that I can see your point that it might be sometime, but the way that they have the analysis now is it's in a very limited area and they can't really rob from the bus.
I guess my point in that is that if I'm in the Swift area and it's running through if my Swift line is running right through where there's a Zip line and I was going to take the Swift line 10 blocks north, I can just call the Zip and instead of taking Swift. But
Yeah,
you
it
understand.
also might take you longer to call. Zip versus hop on it because the
Mhm.
bus might be there in 2 minutes.
But if I have to walk 3 blocks to get to the Swift line, or that's what I'm saying.
It's-
Hey,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's choices in all of it. You're right.
All right, so the next thing that we've been working on is criteria and analysis for future zones. You know, the trade-off in public transit has always been a familiarity with frequency and coverage, right? You can have one or you can have the other. It's hard to have both. And in areas where there's high population and employment, the goal of moving more people in fixed route, it works very well. It's very successful. I mean, we see that with our Swift network. Where it gets more challenging of serving your community well is when there's lower density and you have a roadway or infrastructure network that doesn't support that. So when we're looking at zone criteria, we started with what we already use when we're working on our fixed route system. So when we developed the 2024 network, we used the criteria that you see: equity, cost, ridership, and customer input, community input. And we're going to want to use those as we continue to think about where future microtransit zones will be. In a microtransit system, planning one of the things that's really positive though is when we're establishing a new zone is that we have this opportunity to navigate the street network differently because we have a smaller vehicle. So we're going to be working on refining that. And one of the things that'll be really helpful coming out of the 3 pilot areas, because they're so very different, is learnings about how we're going to do that zone analysis and criteria for the future. So this is our work plan for through 2025 and into 2026. Molly mentioned that we're going to lean on those learnings from the 3 pilot areas. We're going to do a ton of modeling, so financial analysis, looking at ridership patterns, demographics, and equity. The goal is to come up with a future mix of service that really serves our community optimally. And we're excited about that. I've been saying this to Molly is we've had this one thing for a long time, right? Fixed route service. And we've done the best that we could with it, but we knew that there were shortcomings and challenges around that. And the ability to bring microtransit into our service portfolio really just opens up a lot of opportunity for us to serve our community. So we're really excited about that. And we'll need to balance all that as well with all the other priorities of the agency, right? So you just heard about our zero emissions program. We have a build out of our Swift network, and we're going to have to balance what our service portfolio mix is like. We can't grow fixed route and zip infinitely. And so that'll be another thing that we'll be doing around that financial analysis. It won't be something done in a vacuum. How will we balance those priorities? So lastly, we just wanted to share our timeline. So we launched our 3 pilot zones in December, very exciting, and we're here today at the board workshop. We're going to come back to the board in September, and Jennifer and her team will be able to share key learnings from our 3 pilot zone areas. And then December, we'll be here before we know it, and we'll have celebrated a year anniversary with those 3 pilot areas. We're excited to figure out, once the pilot ends, what will the recommendation be? Will those services continue, or will we have learned something different? And then we are going to really start honing in with that work program on what the mix of service portfolio will look like for an agency, and we'll start integrating microtransit into our service change process. So the goal is for the March 2027 service change to include both fixed route and microtransit service plans that we'll share with the board. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm always happy to answer any questions.
No questions?
Good job.
The zero
Okay.
emissions team wore them out.
I do appreciate that you're coming to the Lake Stevens Chamber to give an update next month, so I appreciate that. And I also think Muckle Tea is ripe for zip.
Yeah, what are the next 3? Do we know yet?
Look at the timeline.
It may not be 3, it may be less and maybe more. I think the important thing I'd note about the timeline that Melissa's pointed out here is the work to craft the service portfolio for the March 2027 service change starts much
Now.
earlier, 6 months out, you're cranking
Yeah.
to get those decisions made, and that's a public facing process. We'll be engaged with the communities and with the board in an iterative fashion to get to some decisions about that. So, and probably Title VI and all of the usual features to that analysis.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent presentation. I really appreciated that, and I look forward to seeing the service show up in my neighborhood. Okay, we are getting short on time. I will do my comments, which is the next regular meeting is scheduled for February 6th at 3 p.m. I'm reading it this time because I messed that date up the last time. At the end of the February meeting, board officers will be selected for a 1-year term. These are the board chair, the vice chair, and the secretary positions. Next, we will move on to board communications, and I want to start with whoever represent Lance Norton. Anything to say?
Board communication.
Well, I was napping, right? No, I regret to inform a lot of you, all of you on the board and the rest of you in the audience that I've decided to retire for the second time. And I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed over the years attending these meetings. And I've learned a long time ago that, you know, stop asking so many questions, just listen. And that's the one thing that a lot of people that I've represented over the years had failings with. And I used to urge them that just take in what you can. And I think I have over the years, going back to 3 prior CEOs, and Kim and many others in this room were there in those years of the prior CEOs, Joyce and Emmett, and now we're so blessed to have Rick with us as the CEO. And I've enjoyed understanding my facet here, and I've learned an awful lot. And I appreciate now more than ever this side of transit. Sorry, I most, as you can imagine, was dealing over the years with representing the union members. And I did that back east and came out here with my wife on vacation to see her sister. And while I was here, I was getting fed up with the East Coast. The city of New York was in bankruptcy. I had just recently come home from the service. And in those years, you either were going to get drafted or enlist. And before I got drafted, I enlisted and I did my service overseas and came home. I'll digress for a moment. And the girl that I dated in junior high school, I ended up, when I came out of the service, looked her up because we had dated through high school. And we lived together for 2 years before getting married, until one night she said to me, Lance, and I said, yes. And she said to me, when are we going to get married? And I looked at her and I said, Carol. And she said, yes. And I said, why do you want to ruin a perfectly good relationship? We were married then 2 weeks later. 50 years married, and I lost her 8 years ago. And 6 children, 4 boys, 2 girls. And representing people as I did for so many years and listening to certain individuals complaining all the time, I used to think how fortunate I was to have a wonderful woman in my life. And sometimes, you know, look back on things over the years, and I know how lucky I was. Anyhow, I can go on and on, but I thank you all for accepting me and I screw up my sense of humor so many times, but most people know me. And anyhow, I thank you all so much for putting up with me, and so many friends in the audience. God bless you. Thank you.
Councilmember Daughtry.
Yeah, I can't follow that one, so.
Mayor Marine.
Oh, yeah, I can't either, but just want to say, Lance, it's been a pleasure. When I came back, you were here, Jan's still here, Kim was here. I'm like, oh, it's like I never left. Anyway, it's been great having you on the board. You've added a lot to that, a lot of that experience. So thank you, sir.
Councilmember Schwedding. Mayor Roberts.
Well, Lance, I'll just would say quickly, because I was here before at another city, I was as an alternate, and you were a little crabbier back in those days, I think. And I think you've mellowed out a little bit over the years. And the one thing I know about you is that you always take care of people, including your family, your wife, that dog of yours, that Toyota Camry. That's just the way you roll. And we're gonna miss you, and we're in the same neck of the woods. So hope to see you more, and really appreciate what you've added to the dais and this board. You even when you had a difference of opinion, you shared it very forthrightly, but you didn't hold it against anybody, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. Yeah.
Mayor Frizell.
And I would echo the comments of Mayor Roberts that I've appreciated you standing up for our union members. I've appreciated even your sense of humor as you brought things to this board and caused me to think more than a time or two about what are we doing and how are we doing it. So enjoy retirement, second time around.
We'll go remote. Mayor Nary.
Yeah, boy, Lance, I didn't know about this till today, but I'll just second what everybody said, as well as say, I just have so much respect for you, Lance, and you just are a consummate professional, and the way that you represent labor, those will be really huge shoes to fill. And you've just been such a great part of our board. You've really added a ton to it. You always have insightful things to say, and you bring a lot to the table. And so I will greatly miss having you serve with us on the board, and miss you being a part of it. And I appreciate your friendship and your service over these many years, and your passion for transit always comes through, and you and your great family. And so all the best to you as you retire again.
Mike Gallagher. Rachel, is there anyone else online? Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your comments, Mayor Frizell, because I too appreciate Lance's sense of humor, and it's been months and I can't get the image out of my head of the bus going through the wash with the windows open. So anyway, we haven't tried that yet. We haven't had to, fortunately. I want to clarify something for process purposes. In talking with Danny, she had indicated, Danny Julian, the head of ATU, had indicated that you were going to serve through the March board meeting. And you don't have to say whether that's the case or not today, but either way, we would love to have you here at the March board meeting, because we would love to do a proper formal recognition of you as an outgoing board member and your 15 years of service. So we can work together with Rachel to figure out those details.
And I will conclude with this. Lance, I will miss you. I will miss you. I have enjoyed everything everybody has said, the respect, the laughter, and just the conversation. So sorry to see you go. I hope we can meet up again. Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.